this is a track I wrote. I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to talk about the sounds that I used, and then I'll play it again. All right, so that is something I created, and all the sounds recorded with one of two things. On my phone with a little Shure microphone that fits into the lightning port, stereo microphone, or these ones that are mono, like this track here and this track here. I recorded those with my phone, with no microphone on it. So, this first one here is some sort of ambient water. I forget exactly what that was, but this blue one here. So my house up in New York has a small greenhouse attached to the basement, and it sort of comes out from the basement, and then there's a curved window, and it's like a curved construction with a metal frame, and then about 20 or 30 smaller window panels inside of it. And the curved part, when it's snowing, right, or raining, you can get right up to that with a microphone, and you get this really beautiful spray of rain hitting the glass, and you're inside, so you don't get wet. So that's right here. This is wet snow, the blue one hitting the greenhouse. This one right here, this amber one right here, that was from maybe a decade ago or older. We were vacationing in the summer in the Bay Area, visiting my cousin and a few friends of mine. And we took a drive down the California coast to a place called Big Sur. And there is a restaurant in Big Sur called Nepenthe. And then it's right, you go inside and you can overlook the Pacific coast, and it's up on a cliff. It's beautiful. They actually, at some point, they had a Pacific Ocean cam, and unfortunately, a lot of times there's fog and you can't see anything out of it. But when the days that it was working, it's like an amazing sight. Anyway, on the downstairs part of this, they had a shop, and in the shop they had maybe 40 or 50 different wind chimes, and they had sliding doors open in the back of the place and in the front of the place, and there was this breeze coming from the ocean right through the place, and all of these chimes were sort of like this cacophony of different pitches all happening at the same time. So that was that. And then right here, this was this bird in a tree. This is like some sort of exotic bird that I found down here in Florida that I recorded one day at the beach. There's a palm tree it was sitting in. So, then over here, there's these waves that I captured down here, and then I slowed them down, ocean waves. And then there was a geese up in, there's a river in my village in New York called the Wallkill River. And one day I was taking the bridge over it. I was walking the dog, and a bunch of geese started flying, and I took the phone out because there was a lot of them, and I recorded the video of it in slow motion. And so then I took the audio off of that, and the audio was pitched a couple of octaves lower, right? So you have all of these different events that I played around with. And then once I got them in the computer, I did a bunch of different kinds of treatment to the sound, some of the sounds, to maybe make the pitch drop as it's playing, or to add some ambience to the sound, some delay, some reverb, all sorts of stuff. And then it was a matter of me assembling all of these different elements into a narrative that sort of unfolded. And one other aspect of me doing this that I'd like to bring out today is how the music that you create inside the computer, if you don't have it animated on multiple levels, it will sound really mechanical, stiff, and boring. So the one thing that I try to do with this is the sound and the piece, it's like waves. Things are unfolding one after the other. And I tried to build it up in a way where it started simply and it got, it had different heights of dynamic, and then it comes down and it comes back up, and things come back in different spots. And you start to recognize, instead of musical phrases, you recognize sounds. Oh, yeah, that's the birds, right? Oh, and it's coming back in here, but there's a different accompaniment, or maybe it's treated a little bit differently. And so those are the organizational principles, and it becomes a piece of music. So let's take a listen to that one more time, and then we'll move forward. Here we go. All right. So I processed the sound. So the that's probably the snow. Yeah, the slow motion geese right here. This right here. I processed the sound so that it sounds like choir. These are the things that you learn as you get into this study. It's very entertaining. You can amuse yourself by what you could transform something into. Now, the next thing I want to talk about before we start getting into the class materials is something that I think will help all of you that are taking digital recording and comp 2, and also those of you in this class. It'll give you, this is something that is so incredibly important to understand, that I do spend time on it, going over and over it. It's really understanding how signal flows in a DAW environment is very important for doing things like I just showed you and for creating really compelling mixes. And I'm going to do a little presentation here that I've prepared for this. And then I'm going to do a little demonstration, which is why I've got this light in back of my head and another camera back there. So let's open up. Let's go to the PDFs. So the first one I'm going to talk about is basic signal flow. And I'm going to use something that's familiar to everybody. And I'm going to get myself off the screen here so that I don't block the PDF at all. Everybody understands a guitar, right? This is, and we're going to read backwards from left to right rather than from right to left, because that's how in a guitar into an amplifier, through what I'm going to show you, that's how signal flows, which is a little confusing. So the guitar is the source and the speakers of the amplifier are the output. So how does the source get from here to these speakers? Well, the first thing you have to realize is that the guitar's strings vibration is turned into electrical energy by the pickup. So if we zoom in on the guitar here, right, we've got these strings, and everybody knows that these frets divide the string up into different lengths, which causes different pitches, so that if you put your finger right here, it's the distance from here to the bridge is much shorter, so the string will have a higher pitch as opposed to if you put your finger on the fret here or play an open string, which is lower. And then these three things here are the pickups. And the reason that there are three pickups is that the placement of the pickup picks up the vibration of the string at a different part of its cycle. And that creates a different tone. So that the pickup that's closest to the neck, and this is the neck of the guitar, gets a more round and mellower sound. And as you go further down towards the bridge, which is this device here, the sound becomes much more treble, much more twangy, much more spiky, and I can demonstrate that too in a minute. So you vibrate the string by plucking it with a plectrum or your fingers, and that vibrating string is picked up by the pickup. And you have a selector switch here to decide which pickup you want, but let's say it's picked up by this guy right here. This has magnets in it and wires, all wrapped around the magnet. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 magnets, these little poles here. And there's one of these magnets for each string so that you have equal representation. You can play any string and it will be picked up equally because they're spaced correctly from the string. So in other words, the space between this pickup pole and this string is the same as this one here. And you can see that they do move a little bit, right? Because that depends on how the guitar is set up. So like this one here is a little bit to the right of the magnet, and this one is more to the right. But generally speaking, they all pick up a very similar amount of vibrations. And then they change that vibration into electrical energy. And the pickup is something called a transducer. And a transducer is a device that converts one type of energy to another. Another kind of transducer is a microphone. So I'm talking into this microphone. The microphone has a magnet in it and a voice coil. And the magnet and the voice coil changes my voice into electrical energy, and then it goes through the cables into my microphone, my audio interface, which has a microphone preamp, and then that preamp will convert the signal, give it more. That electricity will give it more gain, and then that comes into the computer, and that's what you're hearing, right? So my vibrations of my voice is picked up by the mic, that gets transferred to electrical energy. It goes into the mic preamp, into the audio interface, and then the audio interface on my desk, which is, let's see, get this on here, which is this guy here. This turns that electrical energy into audio, and then that gets changed into digital information, which gets with the USB-C cable into my computer, and then that's what you're hearing. So a transducer changes the information to electrical energy, and then that electrical energy eventually gets changed, transferred back into audio. So how does that happen? Well, right here on the guitar, you have the output jack. So these are wired through these knobs here and this switch, and these are tone and volume knobs. And then it comes out of this jack, and you have a 1/4 inch guitar cable, which goes from here to the input of the amplifier, right? And the input of the amplifier goes into this stage right here with these knobs, and that is the guitar preamplifier. So it takes that very weak electrical signal, and then it brings it up to a level that can drive the next stage of this amplifier, which is the power stage, right? So you got the preamplifier and the power amplifier. The preamplifier takes the weak electrical signal that comes out of the guitar through this cable, and it amplifies it up enough that it can drive the power amp. And then that power amp's output is hooked up to these speakers. And the speakers are like a reverse microphone. They're magnets that vibrate. And so they take that electrical energy and then they vibrate in a manner that changes, that it vibrates, excites the air and creates sound. So electrical energy is, the vibrations are changed to electrical energy, and then eventually electrical energy is changed back into vibrations. And that's how, but the signal flows from the string through the pickups and the electronics of the guitar, through the cable, to the input of the amp, through the preamp, through the power amp, and out the speakers. That's the signal flow from here. So you've got one complete system that starts with the strings being vibrated and ends up at the speakers. Is that confusing to everybody, or you got the basic gist of it? Hina, do you understand that? You look like you're ready to shoot me. I'll do it one more time, not completely like that, but I'll do it one more time quickly. So the string gets vibrated. These are like little microphones on the guitar, the pickup. The microphone or the pickup picks up gets the vibrations, and it changes it into a very weak signal, but it's electrical energy, like the electricity in the wall socket. And then that comes out of the guitar into the amplifier with a cable. And then the cable goes into the front part of the amplifier, which takes that very weak electrical signal and gives it more volume, basically. And that volume can drive the next stage of the amplifier, which is the power stage or the power amplifier. And then that goes, the signal goes out of the power amplifier into the speaker, and the speaker does the opposite of what the pickups do. It changes the electrical energy into vibrations. So a microphone takes electrical energy and turns it in, takes a vibration and turns it into electrical energy. And a speaker does the opposite. It takes electrical energy and turns it into vibrations. And that vibrations excites the air, and then you hear that as musical information. All sound, as we know, is vibrations. Okay, so that's the basic signal flow there. Now, the next basic signal flow is doing things that are called an insert. And the inserts are signal modifiers, right? So you have the guitar and the same thing. The electrical energy goes out of the guitar onto a cable into these pedals, which all change the sound. So a wah-wah pedal is like a filter that cuts frequencies and out, and you can move the frequency response up and down, which gives it the signal, the sound that it gives it. Or it goes into a pedal that adds harmonics and overdrives the sound. Or it can go into a delay or echo pedal. Or it can go into a reverb pedal. Or it can go into all those pedals. And then it goes from there into the amplifier. So these are inserts, right? And you notice that in Pro Tools, we have a column that says inserts. And that's where we're putting our instruments. Okay? So in Pro Tools, the equivalent is that your source is either an audio file or a software VI, a virtual instrument like Expand 2 or Mini Grand. That's creating the sound. And that sound is going through the signal chain of Pro Tools, and you can insert into the audio path from the source EQ, compression, delay, reverb, and then that goes out the master bus to speakers. So let me show, I'm going to show you this in actuality. So give me a second here, just turn on my other camera and make sure it's in focus. And let's do this. I have, it's the same electric guitar. It's on that picture. All right. So this is an electric guitar. This is a Fender Stratocaster. And I've had this for about 15, 17 years. And it's been modified. But the string, let me turn the volume up. The string is vibrating, right? It's a certain pitch. If I fret it here, it's a higher pitch. If I fret it up here, it's a higher pitch still, right? And when I pluck the string with my finger or the pick, the string is vibrating. That vibration is being heard by this device here, which is a pickup. This pickup is a microphone. The sound is being turned into electrical energy, and that energy is going through or electrical signal that's going through all of the controls here and out here. And here I've got a cable, and that signal is going through this cable, right? And so that cable is eventually ending up in this, the signal is eventually ending up into this amplifier, and this amplifier has a bunch of controls. And so it has a preamp and a power amp. So the preamp is in the volume right here. So if I turn this down, it's quiet. If I turn it up, it's louder, right? You all know that. Oh, right? So now there is, let's turn this down. There's reverb on that. Now, what I've got here is a little pedal board that I put together this fall. So my guitar is plugged in here. You can't see that. Give me one sec. Okay. So the signal comes, the cable comes out of the guitar, and it's plugged into here, and the signal path goes from right to left. And all of these are modifier pedals that are inserted in the signal path. And then after this last one on the left, that gets plugged into the input of the power amp. So these are things that are inserted in the path. And this is like the insert in Pro Tools. And each one of these pedals does something different, right? So if I play this, let me turn this down a little bit. I can't stand the tone. That's a little better. So this one right here, you can't hear that, but what that does is it adds something called a buffer. I can also turn the gain up on that, which I'm not going to do because I've got other pedals for that. But there's something called a buffer here, which gives you back high end. And when you're going through a lot of devices, it's good to have something called a buffer in your signal path. This is a compressor. So I can really compress something a lot. And you hear how the sound is changed. And then these are all distortion, different kinds of distortion. So this one just adds a little bit of gain. So the sound is very clean. There's just a little bit more hair on that. And then this one is even more. Even more. And then this is sort of creamier. And then what this box does here is this gives you all my time-based effects. So it has reverb. You can hear the reverb tail. It has an echo. So those of you that are on DRAC2, that's a model of that Binson Echo Rec with the spinning disc. There's another delay here. That's like a Bucket Brigade delay. It has something called chorusing. And then it has a different kind of reverb, which is called shimmer. And you see, once I start playing with these different kinds of time-based effects, you get a different feel from the music, right? Just play simple stuff. Anyway, these are all inserted in the path of the sound. So if, like, you can hear like a guitar player will have typically a couple of delays and an overdrive. So, all right. So that's enough of that. Let me mute that. But that's basically a demonstration of that. And let me put the guitar down, get my feet out from under the cable so I don't knock anything over, and turn this camera off so I can save the battery. Okay, so that's inserts, right? Let's move forward to the next PDF. Track types. And this is good for everybody. So let's actually move past this for today. So let's go to DAW, simple signal flow. Okay, so you have your audio track or your instrument track, which creates audio. That goes through the audio channel. So we haven't looked at the mixer yet. I'll show you this in a second. And then once it goes through your mixer channel, it ends up at something called the master bus. That's where all of your sounds from all of your different tracks are summed into a stereo output. That's what we're working in. We're not working in Dolby Atmos or 5.1 or 7.1. We're working in stereo. And then from the master bus, it goes through your audio interface, right, out into your speakers. Or if you're using just your laptop, it comes out of your laptop speakers or your earbuds. All right, so the source, the audio track through the audio channel. The source could be the MIDI information on your instrument track, which plays through the insert, which is your expand or mini grand, and that goes through the audio channel, which eventually ends up at the master bus to the output. This is up on our OneDrive. Now, for multiple tracks, right? And oops, gee. Let's do that one more time. So, and this is with audio tracks. It's the same thing with instrument tracks. So your audio or your instrument audio goes through multiple tracks, and this all gets summed into that master bus, right? All 4, 10, 12, however many tracks you have, all gets summed into the master bus. And the output of that goes to your output, your speakers, your earbuds, whatever your output is, right? And this is called summing. And this is why I'm going to very soon get you guys working and making sure that your gain staging is correct. Because if your gain staging is not correct and you're overloading your master bus, you're going to get distortion. And it's also going to, even if you don't get distortion, it's going to give you not as good of a sound. Now, the next thing to think about, and this is for the DRAC2 people, and we will be doing this at the end of the semester in this class too. So you guys, you have instrument tracks or audio tracks. It goes through the audio channel, right, and to the master bus. But let's say that you want to add reverb, right? You would input something, well, you would add something called an stereo aux track. And an aux track is a track that doesn't create sound. It just lets sound be passed through it. So what you do is you use a send, right, there's a send column that we'll show you in a second. That's this one here. You notice in my mixing channel, I've got the inserts up here, and now I've got a send. And what the send does is it sends a copy of the audio. There's a little mixer that comes up, and I'll show you this. The copy of the audio gets sent to the aux track, and that gets blended in both outputs. If you've got reverb in this, so the reverb signal gets blended in with the dry signal, and both of those go to the master bus. Okay, so I'm going to do a Command-Shift-N, one new stereo instrument track, and we'll just do Mini Grand. And then one stereo aux input and one stereo master bus, master fader. Okay. All right, so this is Mini Grand, and I'm playing Mini Grand, right? And you're hearing sound, and you're seeing sound coming here. This is the audio level, and right here, this one is the MIDI level. And we're going to start going over MIDI next week. I'll be explaining that. I have a lesson for that as well, a little bit more deep depth, right? So you could see that if I play the piano with a very light touch, the level is lower. And if I play it, it gets louder, and the bar goes up to denote that that's more amplitude. So the sound comes out. The MIDI, so you get MIDI information by what you play on your keyboard. The MIDI information triggers the Mini Grand, which you by what note you play and how fast you press the key down, it tells the Mini Grand what dynamic and what pitch to play. And so Mini Grand sends audio out of its outputs through this channel, and then that ends up going out the master bus. So in other words, if I play this, you're also going to see level down here. Let's zoom out a little. Right? If I change the output to something else, you're not going to hear anything. You're going to see things moving, but you're not hearing anything because it's not going through the master bus. I don't have line 3 and 4, which is this. I don't have that hooked up to anything. So let's put it back through the monitor. And so now this is the input of the master bus. If I have no output or the output for that, this is the output for the master bus, but it has to have these set for that, right? So in other words, the output of this has to have the same output as the master bus. So if I change this to no output, you're going to see that no signal. This is still going out of the audio path, but it's not, there's no level coming out of the master bus. But if I do this, right? Now, so if I show you the mixer window, which we don't really work in the mixer window in this class that much. I do it a little bit more as we go on. In Audio MIDI 2, we work with a little bit. So I'm playing something here, Mini Grand, and the signal is going from here, and it's eventually going through the master bus. Now, I can prove that it's going through the master bus because if I take the volume fader and I bring that down, you see how it's muting, it's bringing the volume of this instrument down. So this is like the master control. This is like the big volume knob on a stereo or something like that. And you could put things in here that affect the sound of every instrument that's going through there. Now, the next thing to do is on, let me just move this out of the way for a second. Right here, we have the inserts, the instrument, and the I/O. I'm going to add another column called the sends column. Okay? Now, this is an aux track, which I'm going to rename it Reverb. And I'm going to plug a reverb into there. So I'm just going to go to reverb, and I'm just going to put our deverb in there, which we started working with in the other class. So those of you that are just taking Audio MIDI 1, just pay attention now. We'll go over this again later in the semester. So don't worry about it if you don't understand it right at this moment. We will definitely go over this again, probably in about 4 or 5 weeks. So now I'm playing the piano and you're not hearing any reverb, right? So we need to have something where we send a copy of this sound through this channel. And that is by using the send A through the sends thing, the sends column, excuse me. So if I click on this, you'll notice that there are two kinds of outputs. There's an output. So these are your audio outputs of whatever device, if you've got. You will have, if you've just got a laptop with no audio interface, they'll just say the speakers or your earbuds or something like that. But there's also a column called bus. So this is what we want to choose, is the bus, because you ever see an old movie and there's a television operator and a telephone operator, and they're sitting in front of this big control thing with all wires hanging all over it? That's called a patch bay, and they patch like somebody's phone call from one person to the next person. And the mechanics behind that is, in the back of that contraption are these things called bus bars, right? And that like lets you route energy from one place to another, BUSBAR. So in recording studios, they use that terminology to route audio signals. They say that they bus it from one place to another. And when I first started doing this when I was in my 20s, I thought, yeah, I guess that they're just thinking like they're taking a bus, like a city bus or something like that. But that's not the antecedents of this. It's a bus bar. And I'm going to go over that again in the future. And then what you need to do next is you need to set the input, which is this guy here of this track, to receive bus 1 and 2. Right? So now you notice that if you click on this bus right here, a little fader shows up. So I'm just going to play some chords, and I'm going to bring the level of this fader up. And as I do, you'll see that there's going to be level coming through here, and you'll hear reverb. Actually, Mini Grand has reverb already in it, so let's turn that reverb off. There you go, very dry. So I'm routing a copy of the audio, because if I mute this track, there's only audio coming out of here. And if I add this on, there's audio coming out of both of these tracks now. The dry signal is coming out of this track, and only the reverb signal is coming out of this track. So let me show you. I'm going to explain what I'm doing right now in the future, but I've set it up so that if I mute the piano track, you're only going to hear the reverb signal. So one thing you have to realize is that there's twice as much audio coming out now. There's the audio volume coming out from this track and from this track. Okay, so that's how you do something. That's one way to route audio. Now, why do you do this, and why don't you just insert reverb into here? That's a good question. And let me answer that by talking to you directly. So let's talk about best practices, right? Recording studios have been in existence for 60, 70, 80 years. And over that time, because of the technological limitations, right, a certain set of practices developed. And as time went on, those practices evolved. So, for example, we talked about in Tuesday's class, we talked about something called an echo chamber. So if you wanted to add additional reverb onto your project that you've recorded, and it's the 1950s, you would send a copy of the signal through that echo chamber and mix it back in with the full signal. And that was the only way that you could create reverb. So let's fast forward to the 1960s, where you had multi-track recording. So you only typically would have one chamber in a studio. The big studios had multiple chambers, but Moderate studios would have one chamber. So you would use that as the sound stage that would enhance your track. And so let's say you've got 4 tracks. One track is a vocal, and one track is a piano. The next track is a bass, and the next track is the drums. You would send a certain amount of signal with the vocal into the chamber, and maybe with the piano, you might not want it to be as wet. So you'd send a less amount of signal. And maybe with the bass, you would have very little signal because you don't want to make it muddy. And with the drums, you might have a little bit to make it sound a little fuller. But what the aggregate result would be with that, all of those instruments going through that chamber would work together inside the physical space. They would blend together much like they would in a concert hall, except that this was a mini concert hall. And they would give you a really nice, if you were smart and you were a good engineer and you knew what you were doing, it would give you a nice blended sound as opposed to having 15 different reverb sounds all conflicting with each other on each track, right? So, with some software, most notably Logic, Logic is a great piece of software. You get it for very little money, and it's very, very, very powerful, but you have to buy an expensive Mac computer to run it. It doesn't work on PC. But what Logic does is I don't want to say something and sound like a snob or like I'm being critical in an insensitive way. I'm not quite sure what the right term is, but they cater to the lowest denominator. So somebody's just getting started, somebody's fooling around, and they want a piano sound to play. You have the piano sound, you call it up in Logic, and then it comes the plugin that creates the sound, and it comes with a whole chain of signal modifiers, including reverb and maybe echo if it's an electric piano, and they do it all for you, and it's all inserted without thinking about the context and how you're going to make a really coherent, cogent mix, right? By creating a soundstage and having your piece in your instruments in there. So in other words, think about a live band, right? If you've got if you're in a concert hall, well, everybody's playing in the same room. Or if you're at a club, everybody's playing in the same room. You don't go to a place and have people playing in 15 different rooms. That's a special effect that you might see, but typically if you go hear somebody play, everybody's in the same room playing. Now, in studios, they isolate instruments so that people can play together and they can keep the signal clean without having the drums overwhelm everybody. So if you're a vocalist, you might be in a little booth and the drums are playing and they don't get into your microphone. And then you have to add an artificial reverb and maybe a little bit of that same reverb to the drums to make things blend. So that's why this method of doing a send into a time-based effect is very, very useful. Now, I did, when we were working in DRAC2 on delay, I did have it inserted into the signal path. That's okay for those exercises, but going forward, we're going to be using more of the send method. All right. Okay. So that's a little bit of explanation of this send and signal flow. And I'm going to go over all of this stuff again. You don't need to have this down today. But by the end of the semester, you will understand this better because I will repeat this stuff again multiple times during the semester. The signal flow, not as much as using a send and for reverb and all that stuff. Give me 1 second to take a sip. Play a version of the Bartok that I did when I first started teaching this class 11 years ago. And we'll go over some of the things that I did here, and hopefully this will help you out in your rendition, no matter what piece you did. All right, so this is the Bartok file into it. So I'm just going to play it, and then I'm going to show you what I did, and you will use that going forward. So I'm going to mute my mic and play. So I didn't go to town on this, but I did spend time doing the things that I think you guys can handle now, no matter how many tracks you're doing, that will enhance your piece. So let's take a look at some of the things I did with some of the note durations first. So I'm going to solo the flute, and I'm going to open that up in the Midi editor. So what do you notice about the note duration as opposed to the original?
You have the little gap between the repeated notes.
Correct. And why do you think I might want to do that?
For articulation.
Yes, and phrasing, right? So you create a musical phrase, and also so that it also so that you don't have something where it sounds like they have something called the machine gun effect with cheap samplers, where when notes are repeated, they sound like so mechanical it sounds like a machine gun. So yes, so that was Daniel, right? That said that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, I said learn your voices. So you'll notice that the first note is short on both of these phrases here. And then even here, I've created a staccato phrase by shortening the notes. So what I did for that was I set my grid up for 16th notes, just like that. And that gave me more resolution with which to play with that. So as you're listening to the piece, you have to think about how you want to phrase this music. Now, if I could play this in on the keyboard and get an approximation of this pretty well by playing it, but not every one of you is a keyboard player, so you have to know how to edit this information once you get into the computer to make it sound more musical, right? And again, I'm going to tell you that going forward, we're going to learn automated ways to do this. But for right now, I want you to do it manually so that you learn you get some skills using the trimmer tool. So basically the way I did that was the note was originally like, I'll make the notes as they originally were. And then I decided I went da da ya da 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 dum da 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 ya da 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 dum, right? So I just sang the phrase in my head and I thought about how I wanted it to sound. And I just shortened the notes that I wanted to shorten. And I did that in the bassoon as well. Right? As opposed to having this note be the right length or the written length. Yeah. You notice that there was more rhythmic energy just by changing the length of that one note in the phrase. You know? It's subtle, but it really... It adds a little energy there. And the thing is, right, it sounds subtle at first, but when you add everything together, the whole piece, with a lot of subtle things, you really do notice a difference. And that's what a big part of mixing is. A lot of subtle things to come together to enhance the entire performance. And by doing stuff like this, you're starting to pay attention to what notes are being played, how they're being played, and how they fit in with the large picture of the piece. Now, a couple of other things I did right here. There's a couple of places. So at the very beginning, that's pizzicato strings. I added those in. Those notes aren't there, right? It's just a single note. That's nothing. That's fine. And if you notice here, what I did was I made the first one softer than the second one. So it's ba-bum, ba-bum. And then this one is ba-ba-ba-bum-bum, right? So I'm going to exaggerate it. And this is where your taste comes in. So this will be exaggerated. Whoops. So you do that to taste, and then that works nicely with the flute. Right? And then also there is, did you hear that? Just a little glock on the first note. So the aggregate, and this is something that I talk about in orchestration over and over again throughout all of my classes. I talk about aggregate. And what is aggregate? It's when all of the sounds that are playing at once complement each other, and the timbre of all of the sounds that are playing at once creates an aggregate sound. So, for example, a flute sounds like this. If you add an oboe in there, that's an aggregate sound. My graduate composition teacher, Professor Musgrave, she called that a flobo, right? A flute and an oboe. And that's a very common doubling in orchestral music, right? But that's a composite sound of two different instruments playing together. So that's a big part of orchestration, and that adds a lot of color when you start thinking in those terms. So in other words, and notice that the bells don't play every note. They play a note, and then they wait. And then they come in again. They enter the conversation a little bit later. If you have everybody talking all the time, you don't get your point across. It's a cacophony. The Glock said something and then waited and then said something else, then waited and let the other people talk. And then it's like telling a story. You know, all music is storytelling. And that's part of this study here, is to be able to orchestrate and do things to the notes that help change something that's bland and vanilla into something that's more interesting and tells a story. So now, a couple of other things. Let's take a listen. And then so right here, the second time through that whole bit with the da-da-da, I have a composite sound made up of 4 instruments playing those 5 instruments, but 4 instruments here. All right, so the melodies play with the legato strings on top and also with the trumpet. But those other bits are a marimba. Let's see, no, not a marimba. I'm sorry, a glock, timpani, and those pizzicato strings. But now they're 3 notes. You can see they're 3 notes here instead of 2. So as we go along, I'm sort of building it up and doing variations. And then the melody now is a composite sound. And this is one way that you will mask that you're using samples, right? And notice I didn't have the trumpet play all the way through to the end, right? I forget why I did that. And piccolo. So these are some orchestrational tips. Obviously, I'm doing more tracks than you guys are doing, but as you unfold your orchestration, these are things that you should think about. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is where the sounds live left to right and how you achieve that. For MIDI instruments, panning does not occur on the audio output. It does not occur in this column here. For MIDI instruments played through an instrument track, panning does not occur here. It occurs at the sampler level or at the MIDI level. So if we notice here with the piccolo, I've got that there right here. If you show the instrument track right here, you'll notice that there's a MIDI volume and a pan, MIDI pan. So I've got the piccolo a little bit to the left. So in my headphones now, that's coming out of the left. The flute's a little further to the left. The oboe is just a little bit to the left. And the English horn, which is right here, is in the center. Right? Okay, now the clarinet is on the right. So in other words, I'm panning things around left and right. So you really, it really behooves you to do this. And how do you figure out a panning stage, right? Well, look at a stage. What do you see at the beginning? So if you look at an orchestra, who's on the left by the conductor? Come on, some of you must play in the orchestra.
The violins.
Yeah, first violins, right? And who's next to the first violins? A little further back from the conductor on the left.
Second violins.
Right, right. And the cellos and basses are on the right, and the violas are maybe sometimes in the center. That can be a little bit muddy, murky. And then you just look. The trumpets can be in a spot typically back, and French horns, and then the winds are sort of in the center and the left, and the percussion is spread around all around the back, right? But it's not, everybody's not standing in the same spot. And when things were recorded 60, 70 years ago in mono audio, it was very difficult to hear all that stuff because everything was coming at you right in the same spot. But we have a stereo field here. And even though stereo is a poor representation of an actual acoustic space because it's only coming from two sources, there are a lot of things that we can do to fool the ear into thinking that it's coming from more spaces than that. So panning, right? And what I would suggest you do is get a sheet of paper or a document and put your instruments on a line and see, what's a nice lineup. You want to have things that balance really well. So for example, in pop music, when you're listening to a recording, the drums and the bass are in the middle, and then things are panned around those. And the vocals are also in the middle. When you watch a jazz piano trio on stage, right? Typically the piano's on the left, the bass player is in the crook of the grand piano, and the drums are on the right. Now, that's interesting because most people now are listening to music with earbuds or headphones. So then that gives you a thing where the drums are over here and the piano's over here and the bass is over here. So sometimes you'll have the drums, an engineer will mix that differently, and that becomes interesting where sort of almost everybody is in the center, except that the piano is spread wide so that the piano's left hand is in your left ear and the right hand is in your right ear, and it sort of moves around that way. So there are different ways to think about these things. But I used to either look for a PDF online and have it open in one of my other windows, or I would get a piece of paper and just write where people should be and then set it up, take a listen, and see what it sounds like, if I liked it, if I need to adjust something afterwards. Okay, so now the next thing I did is I changed the tempo. So if we go up here, right, you change the tempo by going to a measure and clicking on this little plus right here, and then a tempo change thing menu comes up. And you could change tempo anywhere in Pro Tools. It's not a problem. And that's great. But what I did was I made a tempo map. So right here by the tempo ruler, you'll notice that there's a little triangle on the left. If you click this, the conductor ruler or the tempo ruler comes up. Right? And you see this here. And this can be resized. And also you can scroll up and down. So you see that I'm not seeing the clear space on the top. You can grab this thing on the right here and go up and down, and you can move that around. And so let me zoom in more. And you'll see that every one of these things, I did an accelerando. I accelerated the tempo. So I started at 1.4 114.5, and then it just gets gradually faster and faster, right, until we get to 119.5. So how did I do that? Did I add individual tempos? No, I used a pencil tool. So where's the pencil tool? The pencil tool for this ruler exists right here. All right. You don't use this for MIDI editing, but for editing this and audio tracks, this is your ruler. So if you notice that it has a downward facing triangle, which means that there's another menu there. So if you click on this, it opens up and it has all these different shapes. At first, we will work with triangle, square, and random and freehand later. At first, until you get your skills together, use the line. All right, it's just easier. And then as you get better at doing this, you'll be able to do freehand and do really nice shapes. But at first, just use the line. All right, and also when we do work later on, we're going to use some of those other shapes, which can do some really wild stuff. And basically, what I like to do is I like to go from right to left. So let's say I wanted to start at right here, and I click and I drag down a little bit. So now I've created something. And what if I exaggerate it and went like this? So I'm just clicking. So now, and then you can also make this bigger and smaller. There's a little plus and minus right over here. So I'm going to click the minus. And now we can see that whole bit in there. So now this will really accelerate. Right? And if I really wanted to be a jerk, I could do something like this. But you notice that they're just subtle changes that I did, right? And basically, why would I do that? First of all, I like the piece a little bit faster. I think it's a little pedantic at 80. But when people are performing live, they speed up and slow down. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if you're doing it for a musical purpose, right? So there's, in classical music, the melodic content typically dictates the time. The linear tension is with the melodic content. So in other words, if you're playing a melody, da, 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 da. So if the guy's conducting it, da, 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 right? So it's not like when you're playing with rhythm section where, right? The rhythm section time is much different than orchestral time. And this is an orchestral piece now. So I'm phrasing the melody with the tempo. That's what I'm listening to, right? So, da 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 da, right? So you hear stuff like that in orchestral music all the time. The conductor is leading that, and or if the players, like it's the Orpheus Ensemble, they do that themselves. They play together, but basically you have the conductor leading that tempo fluctuation, and that's what this track is right here. It's the conductor track, basically. So this is something that you can add to your piece. So and especially what's nice is at the end I do a little rallentando. Oh, sorry. Let me unsole. Let me just all the instruments playing. Right, that little rallentando at the end gives you a nice emphasis. It's much nicer than da 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 da, right, with this piece. So that's another technique that you can use. So right, so we did panning, we did articulation with the note lengths, and we changed the tempo. So those are 3 techniques that I want you to add into your revised assignment. I'm going to look at your assignments. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to look at them tomorrow, but definitely Saturday. I'll be looking at all the assignments from both classes and getting you a feedback video. Now, let's move on and let's Any questions on any of that, right? The video will be up. You'll be able to watch it if you need to review this stuff. Now, let me show you guys a couple of other things. Let's see. Let me open up a new session. So let me close this. I'm not saving. And Command-Shift-N. Let's see. I have test right here. No, let me just do a new session. I'll call this class 4. Class 4 already. Can you believe it? Semester's just rocking by. Okay, let me see. Now notice I didn't close that session properly because I didn't shut the tempo window ruler. So now the tempo ruler is open, and Pro Tools remembered that. So just remember how to close a session properly. I went over that. Oh, that's another thing I want to talk about before class ends, is how to close your session properly. We went over it. I went over it in almost every feedback video. It's really important. And also get your preferences set up like I showed you in the feedback videos. Those two things are really important to me, and they will be to you as you get better at doing this stuff. You'll just have to trust that I'm giving you stuff that's going to make your life easier in the long run. It would take me a long time to explain why I do these things, but it does become evident as you work. All right, so Command-Shift-N. I'm going to add a stereo. I'll add the piano track. I'll just add Midi Grand in here. All right, so you can't play keyboards very well, but I want to show you a couple of other ways to input notes and create content. So I've got the piano in here, and I'll record it. I can play a couple of notes. All right, you don't have to have record on, I don't think, but you can go here to the MIDI editor, and we have make sure that your piano track, that the little dot is on so you can see it. So I want to get notes here. How do I do it? Well, the first thing to do is you need to make sure your grid is on, and you need to think of like what kinds of notes that you want to play in your piece. So I'm going to make this into eighth note, and you notice the grid changes. And I'm going to use my pencil tool, and it doesn't matter what shape it is for this. And it's this pencil tool, not this pencil tool. We are in the MIDI editor, and this is the pencil tool for the MIDI editor. So this is C3. So I want to have 4 C3s that are eighth notes on every beat, right? So I'm just going to click, and now if I hit return, those are in there, right? Now, what if I want to make a scale? So I'll hit this note, and I'm going to let me open up my Keycaster so you can see this. I'm going to hit the right arrow. I'm going to hit the upward arrow. I'm sorry. Oh, wait. I'm not in Pro Tools. Damn it. So I hit the right arrow, and it goes to the next note. Then I hit the upward arrow, and it goes up. Well, actually, I didn't hit C. Those are Bs. So let me fix all that. So I'm going to lasso these. There we go. And so now I'm on the first one. I hit the right arrow. Go to the next note and go up 1, 2 semitones, and then hit the right arrow. And then, so now it'll play C, D, E, and F. So all that without playing. Now, what if you want to add chords? Very simple. If let's say I wanted to harmonize this in thirds in this. Yes, Mercy, no problem. Thank you. So to add extra notes, you hold down the Option key, click, and drag. I'm still holding down the Option key. What? One more. So now I should have thirds. All right. So Option, click and drag is your friend. Now, if I wanted to make these into triads, hold Option, click, drag that down to G, down to A. And you'll notice as I'm dragging the note down, this gets dark over here. So in other words, right here, I drag it down, the left piano keyboard will get dark. Each note will get dark as I drag it down. So you can know which pitch you're going to by watching the piano keyboard. So now I'll have a bunch of triads. right? Now, what if I wanted to have this be an octave lower? Well, what you could do is hold the shift key down and click on all these so that they become highlighted, or you can simply lasso, but that, that can be a little tricky at times. So I just like to click and hold the shift key down and lasso. All right, if you want that an octave lower, you can hold the shift key down and push the downward arrow. And if you don't like that, Command Z. Now, if you want to keep that note and do an octave lower so that you're playing octaves in your left hand, right? What you would do is you would copy this. So that's Command C. Then you would shift downward arrow, and then you would merge paste, which is Option M, like Mary. All right, one more time. Okay, so these are all highlighted. Let me make these bigger. Let's zoom in on this. So I'm holding the shift key down and I'm just selecting those so I can drag like that as well. And so I want to have this be left hand playing octaves. All right, so I need an octave below that. But the first thing I want to do is I want to Command C, copy, hold the shift key down, push the downward arrow, and then I'll drop down an octave. And then merge paste, which is Option M. So copy is Command M, and merge paste is Option M. And there we go.
Professor.
Yes.
Are you teaching it like that for a specific reason? Because there's an alternative way to do it. Just option.
Yeah, okay. I know that there's Option Shift, which will do it.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. I got that. I'm just, I'm trying to show as many things as possible. You know what I mean?
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Because, so there's another way to do that. If you Option Shift, it does the same thing. Okay. Now, you could also hold down the Option key and drag all these down to the G down here. That also does. See how, right, Daniel? I'm showing all the different ways that you can do this. That was my goal here. This brings up an interesting point. There are many ways to accomplish the same goal in Pro Tools and in Logic, in all the DAWs. The more ways that you know how to do the same thing, the better off you are, because the context with which you work will tell you which way is a better way to do it. Contextual working. There are times when I'm working on a piece where I just, I'll do the Option Shift. There are times where I'll just Option Drag. There are times where I'll do it the other way. It just depends on what I'm doing. And I just make those choices in my head. And the more experience you get at doing this, you'll be able to do that as well. Now, the other thing that I want to start talking about with you is, oh no, somebody must be here. Okay, somebody must have just come home because I'm hearing some other noise. Or maybe that's my dog walking in the other room. Okay, yes, I have a beautiful dog. Who's a handful. But you haven't heard her barking today, which is great. So I'm going to put in, I'm going to make a flute. Let's see, I'm going to do strings. And I'm going to go make this bigger so you can see it. I'll just insert, expands to, let's see, air, boom. All right, let's show so you can see what I'm doing. Sorry about that. If I forget to change the screen, interrupt me, please, because I get so into what I'm doing sometimes that I forget to switch back to the computer screen. Okay, so let me get strings, and I am going to do tremolo strings. And let's go down to 60 beats a minute. And we'll do a count off of 1 bar. Okay, so let me play something here. Let me get my sustain pedal happening. Okay, now let's go to the MIDI editor and let me get this out of the way here. Now I can just, I'll quickly clean this up. I normally would probably leave this the way it was, but I'm just showing you how to use these tools. Now, this is played. Now you hear that some notes are different volumes than other, and it's not making any sense musically. So what I'm going to do is use this pencil tool, and instead of individually moving all of these velocities, I'm going to go to the line, right? And I'm going to click past the last velocity. I'm going to click and drag to the right. You see how that took all of those up and made them all even. I'm going to quit out of this Keycaster for a second because it's changing my... So I'm going to click, and you notice I just drag, and they don't have to be selected. It's really funny. There used to be a line that drew, but now in Pro Tools there's no line. And then you could do something like this as well, right? So you could have this thing crescendoing, but it's not really working with this particular sound right now for some reason. But if I'll get that going in another sound. But I have a thing that I want to show you right now that's not this. So I've got this all evened out right now, but everything's at one volume, and I don't like that. Now, if you go right here to the lane selector, click on this, and you're going to go down here to where it says controllers. And you're going to select expression, which is MIDI CC11. There are two ways to affect MIDI volume. One is with MIDI volume and one is with expression. I want you to get used to using expression, and I have my reasons for that, which I will explain in the future. So expression right here. Why is it called expression? Who plays pipe organ or Hammond organ or any kind of organ in this class? If you play organ, your right foot is on a pedal, and that is called the expression pedal because that controls the volume of the instrument you're playing. And so when they made the MIDI spec, they just transferred that nomenclature or that terminology into the MIDI spec. So what I can do here is I can draw in a crescendo. Okay? Much like with volume, but now we're doing, much like with MIDI velocity, but now we're doing it with volume. So again, I want to start at my target volume, which I'm going to say is right here, about there, and I'm going to click and draw and make a line. Give me 1 second here. And this should, if everything works, start off soft and get louder. And then I can do a fade out. Right? So now, anybody know what that's called, what I just did there? And it's a term that I want you to use and start thinking about in all your work here. That's automation. I'm automating a parameter that affects the sound. And here it's volume or expression. And you can automate so many things, it's mind-boggling. But this is where you start out. Okay. Another thing you can automate is panning. I would want you not to do that right now. We will be doing that later in the semester, but let me just show you what that's like for those of you that have earbuds in or headphones. So pan is right here. And I can start on the left and go all the way to the right. And So we're automating how many parameters now? Anybody venture a guess?
2.
Correct. We're automating volume or expression and pan. Now we're going to do a third parameter. We're going to automate the pitch. What do I mean by that? We're not going to automate the individual pitches of this, but we're going to change the pitch of this last chord as it fades out. So I'm using pitch bend. And pitch bend is typically this wheel on your controller. So if I play a chord, and if you see incredible keyboard players like Corey, the guy that was in Snarky Puppy, Corey Henry, play synthesizer, or if you see George Duke or Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock playing synthesizer back in the day, you'll see that or Jan Hammer is like an amazing example of that. You see these guys blowing lines with their right hand, and the left hand is on these two wheels here on the keyboard. One is pitch bend and the other is mod, and they typically had the mod set up to do vibrato, and then they would pitch, so they could do lines like that. It's a lot of fun. So we're going to do just here. So we're going to click and drag down. Right?
Your screen.
Thank you. Let me do that again. You know what typically happens? Just as the person says it, I see that I've done it. It's all right. Thank you. Now, what you have to do after that is you have to make sure you go back to the middle position here, which is 0. So let me show you something here.
What unit does that work on?
That'll work.
Value.
Yeah, so it's in the middle, it's 0 when things are panned in the middle, right? The pitch bend, when the pitch bend is normal, not activated, it's 0. So if I click right here, oh, wait a second. They've changed this. Yeah, see how it says 0 there? Let me zoom in on that a little bit more. See that little 0 above there? That's when it's back in the middle position. As I go down, you'll see it's a negative number. If I go up, it's a positive number. And look, it goes all the way up to 8100.
Yeah, do you know what unit that is? 8100 what?
That's just the division of, how far up it goes. That gets set in the software.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll show you how to do that. But for this instrument, let's see how many pitches is it. So what kind of an interval is that?
Second.
What kind of second? Major second.
Yeah.
So what Pro Tools does is it divides up that major second into 8100 slices. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's like a regular modulation wheel. It's the same amount. Most modulation wheels on the keyboards and the organs have that exact amount.
Okay. Sounds good to me. I don't really pay attention to that, but that sounds good to me. But as far as the interval, you change that here, right? So you notice that PB range, that stands for pitch bend range, is set to 2. So let's say I set it for an octave, right? And now I play the keyboard and I move the pitch bend wheel. And if I change it to 3, it'll go up a minor third. So you set the range on the instrument. We're going to go over that, trust me, later on in the semester. So for this week coming up, though, I only want you to automate the volume. All right, and make phrasing. All this other stuff we'll do later. Let me show you something. The last thing for today is we're going to work with Mini Grand. And I'm just going to play a bunch of chords, and then I'm going to fix them. Hold on a second. Let me think for a second. Okay. All right, so I've got this bit I just played, and I made a bad note there, so I'm just going to highlight that and delete it. Now, if we look at our velocity, it's all over the place. There's nothing that makes any sense, right? So I want to voice this so that the melody rings out. So what I want to do is I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'm going to start grabbing the bottom notes of all these chords, just like this. Right, so I'm clicking and dragging down. Whoops, let me scroll back up. And then I'm just going to bring down the velocity of all those. And now when I play this back, the melody is going to sing out, which is the top note. And then this one needs to be adjusted. Right. So that's one way to do it. Let me show you another way. So let me grab all these. Whoops. Now, if you hold the command key down, let me show you that. So I'm holding the command key down. If I hold the command key down, look at the shape of the grabber. See, it turns into a sideways trimmer. You can click and see the velocity stalks go down, just like that. So that's another way that you can do that. That's too loud. And then I think everything is too loud. So what I could just do is Command A and then hold down that Command key, hover, and then just drag, and everything will be made softer. And now that's much more sensitive. And it's got a little melodic field content to it. And then let me add one more thing. So what if I wanted to play the same measures twice, the same passage twice? So if I just drag along the measure ruler, right? And I want to, it's 7 measures. So I'm going to make sure I start at measure 7 and I've got all 7 measures. How did I do that? I used Command and D for duplicate. Now, and then, or you could do, if I wanted to multiple times, I could do Option and the letter R like Robert, and then this little repeat dialog comes up. So if I wanted to repeat that 3 times and make it 4 times through, hit, just boom, and now you've got, hey, it didn't do it. Let me do it one more time. There we go. So let me just duplicate it. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, like I can't play keyboards really well. So I played this in and I've edited, so I've got a nice melodic content, but I've repeated the same thing twice. It's boring. All right. Well, what happens if we, oops, hold on a second. Work on the arrangement a little bit. So what happens if the first time through, I'm holding down, I'm highlighting all these notes. I delete those, and maybe I'll delete these notes here, the second note from the top on those chords. So now the first time through will sound like this. And let me speed this up so we get through this a little faster. And now the second time through, fuller chords. So you've created an arrangement. Or, let me put all that stuff back. What if the second time through, I wanted to take this voice here and drop that down an octave? Well, then I would just use my shift. And now I've got totally different chord voicings the second time through. The same chords, but different voicings of them. So these are little tricks that can speed up your workflow. And if you're not a great keyboard player, these are things that can help. And even if you are a great keyboard player, things like this can really help expand the musical content that you put in, because you can play around with pitch register for each voice of a chord and see, you know, what unusual timbres you can come up with. It's really cool. So anyway, I'm going to go over all this stuff again. Don't worry about this, but I just wanted to just show you more stuff. And notice I was using key commands there. But that the two things for this kind of bit is the automation of the expression and using the pencil tool with a straight line. We're going to do some panning, and then with the arrangement, how I sort of unfolded some of that stuff, and how you can, with, you know, just copy and paste and duplicate, and using Option and Shift to move notes around. So you'll see how that'll help you in this assignment. But as far as going forward, and I'll give you more specific instruction when I give you feedback, it's going to be the panning, the volume, and the articulation, the note length. So those are the three new things that you're going to add, and making sure that you're blowing out your orchestration nicely. So I'll have to take a look at everybody's piece and give you some really individual feedback. So that's an insane amount of material for today. Fortunately, there'll be a nice video that you can all watch if you need to review any of this stuff, and I'll put chapters. I'm probably not going to put the first part of the class with the sound is everywhere, because that's his copywritten material. So I'm not going to post that anywhere. But you were exposed to it. And I think that, you know, if you take more classes with me, you'll be exposed to more of that kind of stuff. Okay, so if there's not any questions, we're going to call it a day. If there are questions, please spew them forth.
I do have a question, Professor.
Yes, sir.
Regarding the bus, sending the tracks to a bus, you said that, of course, it's like good practice, and I intend on working with the bus tracks and stuff. But hypothetically speaking, if you were to have multiple tracks, each with the reverb insert, they had the exact same parameters and values. Would it create a different sound than if you sent all of them to the same aux track? Or would it?
Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you, in the acoustic world, it certainly would, right? Because right. The instruments all interact with each other, and their overtones play around with each other, and they excite the wall and create, you know, the walls of an echo chamber differently. It's just like, you know, let's say you're playing in a room with, you're playing in the orchestra with one person, and so everybody records a line individually, and then you play them all back. It'll sound good, but it'll sound different than if they're all playing in the room together, because right. the volume that they're all playing at, it just excites the wall differently. The other thing about putting a different reverb onto every track is and this is getting less so, is that it uses up a lot of CPU, because reverb is CPU heavy. So computers are getting powerful enough now that that's not as much of an issue as it used to be. But Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I've never done that, right? So I can't really speak honestly about that. I don't think there would be that much of a difference, but it's possible. I'd have to experiment around and see what I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just that I've been doing the other way for so long that I don't think about that. What I don't, and believe me, when you're mixing, you might have 3 or 4 different sounding reverbs. Because in class the other day, right, I showed you how in DRAC2, I showed you how to change the snare drum sound with that nonlinear reverb, right? So, you know, you may have one reverb that just does that, and you might treat just the snare drum and the tom toms with that, but then still put that through another reverb to give it a nicer room sound, depending upon how the drums were recorded. So in that case, you might have, and I know that when I'm mixing my film scores that are orchestral, and I'm using a lot of my orchestral samples, I've got multiple reverbs, but they're all complementary, right? So in other words, I might have 3 or 4 different halls. It's the same hall, but they're all different lengths, different decay times. And why is that? Because one reason is because I want to give a sense of depth. And another reason is that short notes typically need less reverb than long notes. So if you're playing sustained chords, you'll want a longer reverb wash when you're mixing with orchestral samples. But with short notes, a lot of them are recorded in a hall, so you're going to hear that reverb and then the additional reverb that you would add to blend it with if you've got multiple libraries from different companies. So there's a lot of ways that you can play that. But for now, you got to start with the simple and then build to the more complex.
Right, thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Okay, you guys, I will see you next week. And DRAC2 people, we do not have a class on Tuesday because Tuesday is a Monday schedule at Queens College. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will get you feedback videos. And I'll post this up. This will probably go up Saturday also.
Have a good weekend,
Yep.
Professor.
Take care, my friends.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one.